What's that? A Robert Frost poem about loneliness and isolation and alienation and desolation? Well, yes, of course. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion that comes to us from the hallowed pages of Robert Frost. The poem in question is Acquainted with the Night, and this poetry discussion, will appear in several different playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now approaching 600 videos large. The Horror Fest 2024, 31 horror-related videos in 31 days here on the channel, and, of course, the Robert Frost playlist. The poem in question reads as such: I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither right nor wrong. I have been one acquainted with the night. So there's a lot of interesting things to talk about here, but the thing that I want to start on is this. We are obviously within the throes of isolation and desolation and loneliness. We are within the sort of realm of alienation, obviously, but not completely. This word from the title tells us something slightly different is going on than the narrative of the poem. Acquainted with the night. Acquainted with the night. This personifies the night itself, but the night itself is loneliness. The night itself is often used to represent isolation, mystery, darkness of the soul. But a lot of times, if you are mentioning the night as personified, you're talking about isolation, you're talking about loneliness. And in that way, the title itself, starting right there, Acquainted with the Night. In reading the poem, we know that the speaker is a loner. We know that the night is loneliness. And so this title itself is almost like the phrase, me too. Me too. Well, which one of you is two? Well, neither of us is two, right? Me too is a phrase, or that one too, whatever you're talking about, TOO. Neither one of the things is two. So you're setting up this weird sort of separation of the language from the subjects themselves. Acquainted with the night is that same sort of thing, but on a level with symbology, on a level with interpretation. So what this is saying is lonely together. Well, if you're lonely together, which one of you is lonely? Both of you are lonely, so neither of you is lonely. The poem, from that point, moves forward in a journey. The poem, from that point, moves forward almost like a road trip. We have the speaker saying, I've walked out in rain and back in rain. But we know that if the grammar of the poem is to be upheld, it's in reference to the night. So, I have walked out in the rain and back in the rain with my acquaintance, the night. I have looked down the saddest city lane, me in the nighttime. So, the place where this really starts to get interesting to me is down here towards the end. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky. Where does this line come from? One luminary clock against the sky? We were just talking about shouts from the neighborhood that were around you but not for you. And you're talking about a clock. A clock tower, probably. I think that's what we're being led to believe here. And here's the thing, those clock towers, their displays, well, they're not digital, are they? No, those clock towers. I believe this poem is probably from the first part of the 1900s. Those clocks would have been a 12 numeral face. You got the 12 at the top, slightly to the right of that, you have the 1, the 2, the 3. You know what I'm saying. So here's the funny thing about those clocks. Here's the funny thing that plays into this poem. You have regular hours, which are basically PM hours. A few of the AM hours are quote-unquote regular type times. But being acquainted with the night is never the regular type times. We're not talking 6 p.m. in the winter. Being acquainted with the night, you're talking about 3 a.m. You're talking about midnight. You're talking about the 4 o'clock hour. You're talking about... So, those hours look the exact same on the face of that clock. 3 a.m. is the exact same thing as 3 p.m. You wouldn't know it from looking at the clock. You would know it through experience. You would know it by being awake. You would know it because you were not awake. These are inverted hours. These are mirror hours. These are hours set up that mirror the normal people hours. So that 3 a.m. and 3 p.m., they are reflections of one another. But they're not exactly reflections of one another. This mirror world is an inverted world. These hours mirrors the witching hour of 3 a.m., the nighttime, the moon. All of these things have sort of ominous meanings, oftentimes in literature, have often ominous presences in our lives. If you're up at 3 a.m., the odds that you hear something go bump in the night are much improved. So here's the thing I want to ask. Mirrors. If we are able to take the AM hours as mirror hours, mirrors are often used to, well, if you're looking at the spooky course of action here, if you're talking about things which are symbolic, if you're talking about things which are, paranormal. You've got the witching hour at 3 a.m. It is a mirror hour. Mirrors trap souls. That was sort of the superstition, was that mirrors trap souls. Mirrors are other dimensions, other realities. What I think we have here, and I think that, the nighttime itself is very much that way. The nighttime itself is seen as a perverse reflection of the daytime. Instead of the sun going overhead, you have the moon going overhead. You have the same hours. There's a 1 a.m. just like a 1 p.m. There's a 3 a.m. just like a 3 p.m. What this poem makes me wonder is if giving oneself over to the night, as our speaker seems to have done. Our speaker is saying, I am acquainted with the night. In the same way that mirrors were thought to trap souls, if we give ourselves over to the mirror hours, are we trapped there? Are we trapped in those hours that are darkest? Are we trapped in those hours that are least inhabitable? Are we trapped inside those hours that are not welcoming? That seems to be where our speaker finds his or herself. Our speaker here, talking through this poem, is never acquainted with anything else. Not even the watchman. He passes the watchman and has to divert his eyes because he doesn't want to explain what. I have theories on what, but perhaps they are too dark. Still, our speaker is seemingly stuck in the nighttime. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, there's poetry on the channel every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.